Critique of Pure Reason, translated by Max Muller, 1881 edition, Part 2, Transcendental Logic, Introduction, the idea of a transcendental logic. Of logic in general, page 61. Our knowledge springs from two fundamental sources of our soul. The first receives representations, receptivity of impressions. The second is the power of knowing an object by these representations, that is, spontaneity of concepts. So this is the most crucial distinction that Kant makes. So he says that there are two fundamental sources of our soul, sources of our knowledge as well. So knowledge is synonymous with the soul for Kant, and he says that the first fundamental source of knowledge is receptivity, and receptivity is basically our ability to receive impressions from an object that we see in front of us. So receptivity is the power of receiving representations as they are given to us, and the second power of knowing, and the second part of the soul, or the second source of knowledge, is the power of knowing an object by these representations. So the first part of knowledge springs from our ability to receive representations or impressions, and then the second part involves knowing an object through those representations or through those impressions. And knowing an object by virtue of the representations received in receptivity is called spontaneity of concepts. So in the first part, we receive an object as it is given to us, and in the second part, we know an object by framing a concept about it. So by the first, an object is given us. By the second, the object is thought in relation to that representation, which is a mere determination of the soul. So he says that by the first part of the soul, we receive an object as it is given to us. And then by the second, we are able to think about the object in relation to that representation, which is a mere determination of the soul. So we think about an object using a mere determination of the soul. So intuition, therefore, and concepts constitute the elements of all our knowledge, so that neither concepts without an intuition corresponding to them, nor intuition without concepts can yield any real knowledge. So he says that we require a certain level of representation which emanates from within us in order to understand an object which is given to us in receptivity, and then about which we think, about which we frame thoughts. So he says intuition, therefore, and concepts. So receptivity and understanding constitute the elements of all our knowledge, so that neither concepts, so we cannot think without an intuition corresponding to them, nor can we intuit without any concepts which can yield any real knowledge. So he says that concepts without intuition or representation cannot yield any knowledge. In the same way, an intuition without concept cannot yield any knowledge, any real knowledge of the object that we see in front of us. So both are either pure or empirical. So he says that receptivity is either pure or empirical. In the same manner, understanding or thinking or knowing an object in the form of concepts is either pure or empirical. They are empirical when sensation presupposing the actual presence of an object is contained in it. So, concepts are empirical when sensation presupposing the actual presence of an object is contained in it. A concept is pure when no sensation is mixed up with the representation. So the latter may be called the material of sensuous knowledge. So he says that when an object is received in the form of a representation, the pure part of it, when it does not mix up with the representation, then it is called the material of sensuous knowledge. Pure intuition, he says, therefore contains the form only by which something is seen, and pure conception, the form only by which an object is thought. So he says pure intuition therefore contains the form only by which something is seen. So intuition is different from pure intuition. Pure intuition has to do only with the form of something that is seen, and pure conception, the form only by which an object is thought. So there is such a thing called pure intuition and pure conception. Pure intuition means the mere form of what we see in front of us, and then pure conception means the mere form of the concept of an object, or the mere form of an object when it is thought. So pure intuitions and pure concepts only are possible a priori, empirical intuitions and empirical concepts a posteriori. So he says pure intuitions and all pure intuitions and all pure concepts are possible only a priori, in the sense that they are possible only before experience. And then empirical intuitions and empirical concepts are possible a posteriori, in the sense that they are possible only after experience or by virtue of experience. So we call sensibility the receptivity of our soul and its power of receiving representations whenever it is in any wise affected, while the understanding on the contrary is with us the power of producing representations, or the spontaneity of knowledge. So he says that the receptivity of our soul, we will call it sensibility, and receptivity or sensibility is nothing but our power of receiving representations whenever we are affected by something, such as an object in the physical world. And then he says, while understanding on the contrary is our power of producing representations, not merely receiving representations. And this power of producing representations is understanding, and it is also called the spontaneity of knowledge. So we are so constituted that our intuition must always be sensuous and consist of the mode in which we are affected by objects. So he says that we are constituted in a manner such that intuition is always sensuous, in the sense that it has to be affected by objects. Intuition is not purely pure intuition, but it is sensuous. And in intuition, we are affected by objects. So our first interaction, the first interaction with an object is called sensibility or receptivity or intuition. What enables us to think the objects of our sensuous intuition is the understanding. So he says that if we are able to think of an object even prior to its being in front of us, or post being in front of us, in sensuous intuition, then that is called understanding. So what enables us to think the objects of our sensuous intuition is the understanding. So basically, we receive an object in intuition and then we think about that object in understanding. And so understanding is possible only by virtue of sensuous intuition. So sensuous intuition has to provide something to understanding so it can think about an object that we receive. So neither of these qualities or faculties is preferable to the other. So he says sensibility cannot do the work of understanding, nor understanding can do the work of sensibility. So without sensibility, objects would not be given to us. Without understanding, they would not be thought by us. So he says that there's a clear distinction between sensibility and understanding, because without sensibility, we cannot get any objects. Objects are not given to us, and without understanding, we cannot think about objects which are given to us. Thoughts without contents are empty, and intuitions without concepts are blind. So he says that thoughts without contents, in the sense that understanding, thoughts using understanding without the content which sensibility provides, are empty. Thoughts are empty without sensibility. And then intuitions without concepts. So intuitions are the representations that we receive in sensibility, or using sensibility, or through receptivity. When they do not combine with concepts through understanding, then those intuitions or the contents of experience are blind. Therefore, it is equally necessary to make our concepts sensuous, that is, to add to them their object in intuition, as to make our intuitions intelligible, bring them under concepts. So he says that it is necessary to make our concepts sensuous, in the sense that the object received in intuition adds content to the concepts, and then this intuition then becomes intelligible, because intuition is brought under concepts. That is, the intuition of an object is brought under concepts in order to make it intelligible. These two powers or faculties cannot exchange their functions. So sensibility and understanding cannot exchange their functions. The task of sensibility is to receive representations, is to receive an object, is to face the object for the first time, is to be affected by the object for the first time, in the sense that we are physically affected by an object that we see in front of us. So this involves the senses, this involves the body, and then understanding does the rest. Understanding uses what has been given to us, what has been given to the body, to the senses, in order to understand or make the concept of an object, the object itself, intelligible, or to make the object meaningful. So by their union only can knowledge be produced. So he says that sensibility and understanding has to unify for knowledge to be produced. But this is no reason for confounding the share which belongs to each in the production of knowledge. So he says that there is no reason for confounding the share which belongs to each in the production of knowledge. So he says that we cannot think about the different roles that they each have in producing knowledge. On the contrary, they should always be carefully separated and distinguished, and we have therefore divided the science of rules of sensibility in general, that is aesthetic, from the science of rules of understanding in general, that is logic. So he says that there are two sciences of knowledge here, because there are two sources of knowledge, or two parts of the soul. They are aesthetic. The first science is called aesthetics, and the second science is called logic. So the science of sensibility, the science which governs the rules of sensibility in general, is called aesthetic, and then the science that governs the rules of understanding in general is logic. So here he makes a perfect distinction between what we mean by logic and then what we mean by aesthetic. By aesthetic, it is meant that we receive an object. By aesthetic, he means all that is involved in receiving effects, impressions from an object that we see in front of us. And then all that belongs to logic is the act of understanding, or the act of making those representations meaningful in order to frame concepts about an object, thus in order to think about an object that is received, that has been given to us through sensibility.